For nearly 2 decades, faculty members chuckled behind her back, until the day she strode to the whiteboard and unraveled a mathematical enigma that no one, even with a doctorate, could decipher. People barely met her gaze, not the students rushing by, immersed in their headphones, and certainly not the professors who drifted through the faculty dining hall as if levitating above it. She consistently stood behind the food service counters at 6 a.m. and noon, a routine she'd followed for 17 years. Her name tag read Gloria Bexley, yet it was rarely used. To most faculty, she was simply the lunch lady, the one with weary eyes, skin weathered by sun and time, and perpetually that gentle smile. Some even mistook it for a nervous habit. Gloria never corrected them. Each day she served stew, scooped rice, and neatly arranged plastic-wrapped sandwiches onto trays. Her movements were practiced, precise, and efficient. She listened far more than she spoke, especially during the mornings when professors congregated at the rear table by the window, discussing topics most people only pretended to grasp. It was invariably mathematics, dense, abstract equations scribbled on napkins, diagrams on the backs of receipts. Gloria observed. Occasionally she'd pose a question. "Do you believe that symbol signifies the limit doesn't exist?" she inquired one Thursday, eyeing a note Professor McDaniel had left on the counter. He chuckled, not bothering to look up. "Didn't realize they taught calculus in food service," he mumbled, tossing his tray into the bin. That was the kind of laugh Gloria recognized well. Not hearty laughter, but the dismissive sort, the kind that implies, "You're not meant to speak this language." She silently wiped the counter. It wasn't that Gloria was inquisitive. She had simply never lost her affection for numbers. Every evening, she brought home discarded textbooks from the university's recycling bin and delved into them at her kitchen table, in her modest apartment above a Bakersfield laundromat. Her well-worn notebook, filled with proofs and exercises, predated most of the graduate students she served. She never mentioned it, not even to her son DeAndre, who called weekly from Austin, always too occupied to ask more than, "You good, Ma?" She'd respond, "I'm good," and leave it at that. No one knew that beneath her apron, beyond the arthritis and thinning hair, Gloria Bexley still conceptualized in numbers. But aspirations don't cover expenses. Mathematics didn't keep the heating on. Stable job did. So she embraced the early shifts, kept her head down, and absorbed conversations as faculty members jested about concepts like nonlinear algebraic topology and birational geometry. Sometimes, upon hearing something particularly outlandish, like when Dr. Rowe claimed the department chair had miscalculated an entire segment of his lecture, she'd jot a note to herself in the margin of her lunch menu. Gloria didn't mind being overlooked. Invisibility meant serenity. It meant people didn't expect things from her. But it also meant they underestimated her. That all changed one Friday morning in late October. The seminar was announced 3 days prior. "Faculty only," read the sign taped outside the dining hall bulletin board. A visiting professor from Stanford was presenting a theoretical conundrum. People murmured about it in line. Something concerning an unresolved proof in number theory, purportedly insoluble. That Friday, Gloria arrived early. She brought an extra pot of black coffee to the seminar room, as she did for every department event. She didn't intend to stay. She simply enjoyed hearing how individuals smarter than herself attempted to outwit each other. She was standing at the back, holding a carafe, when the guest speaker was introduced, Dr. Curtis Penfield, a name she recognized from a book she kept beneath her mattress. He was younger than she'd anticipated, perhaps mid-40s, with keen eyes and a rigid demeanor that compelled attention. He spoke with clipped precision, outlining a problem involving prime gaps and distribution irregularities. Half the room nodded, the other half frowned, already perspiring. 6 months, he stated, pacing. "My team at Stanford has spent 6 months attempting to crack this. I've brought it here as a challenge. Consider it a riddle with no known solution." You could almost feel the palpable tension in the air, that suspense that builds when a room full of people, mostly men with academic distinctions, are striving to outsmart one another. Some were genuinely there to solve the problem, others merely to be observed deep in thought. Gloria stood near the back wall of room 214, behind the array of lukewarm pastries and 2 large coffee urns, feigning to refill cups that no one had touched in 15 minutes. Her apron bore a faint soup splash from lunch service. Her sneakers occasionally squeaked on the tiled floor. No one noticed her. All eyes were fixed on Dr. Curtis Penfield. He wore a crisp charcoal suit without a tie, sleeves slightly rolled. His laptop projected a sequence of symbols and formulas that most in the room were reluctant to admit they didn't comprehend, but no one dared interrupt him. He commanded that kind of presence. And that brings us to what I've informally titled the R-set anomaly, Penfield declared, his pointer sweeping across the screen. This function here should resolve, given the continuity assumption, but it doesn't, not cleanly, not without introducing a contradiction. Someone in the front row, Professor Alvin Glasgow, Gloria recalled, rubbed his chin with 2 fingers and murmured, "It must be an error in the assumptions." Penfield didn't flinch. "That's what we thought, but we ran the check 6 different ways. At this point, the contradiction is the pattern. We're missing something." He stepped aside and surveyed the room. "This is your opportunity to solve something no one else has. And yes, we've submitted this as a possible clay problem proposal. If anyone in this room manages to crack it, your name gets published first." The professors straightened in their chairs. A few adjusted their spectacles. One began scribbling intensely. Gloria observed a napkin adorned with partial derivatives, like a crossword puzzle. She glanced back at the whiteboard. The equation was a jumble of symbols and constraints, yet its core structure was apparent to her. She recalled a similar configuration buried in an old mathematics journal she'd read 15 years prior. Something about non-trivial solutions in modular arithmetic. It wasn't an exact match, but something about the framework felt familiar. She stared a moment longer. Then she heard it, a low, quick half-laugh. It originated from a group of junior faculty to her left. She recognized one of them, Professor Un Park, who once inquired if she'd gotten lost while refilling the faculty fridge. This time the jest wasn't about her specifically, not yet. But when Gloria moved closer to the board, coffee pot in hand, and tentatively raised her hand with a hesitant, "Excuse me," the entire room pivoted. Blank expressions, frowns. Someone even scoffed. Penfield blinked. "Yes." She hesitated. I think I've encountered a structure like that before. You're treating the set as bounded, but what if you allowed it to behave erratically under mode constraints? Silence. Professor Glasgow leaned back in his chair and whispered, not quite softly enough, "Oh boy." Gloria's cheeks flushed, but she didn't lower her hand. Her fingers tightened around the coffee pot. Penfield looked at her long and appraisingly. Then he looked at the board again. "And you are?" he asked. "Gloria," she said. "I work in the dining hall." Penfield nodded slowly. "Well, Gloria, you mentioned irrational behavior under modular constraints. Are you suggesting we're imposing a linear solution on a nonlinear set?" "Yes," she affirmed. "I mean, it might not be linear at all. It could just appear that way because of the axis folding you're assuming in step 3. She stepped forward and indicated a section of the board no one had yet questioned. Gloria heard another laugh, sharper this time. Someone quipped, "We're accepting math advice from the lunch staff now?" But Penfield didn't laugh. He stared at the section she indicated, his brow furrowed. "Wait a minute." The room fell silent. A beat passed, then another. "Someone hand her a marker," he instructed. A hush spread across the room. Gloria didn't move. "Seriously," Penfield reiterated, "let her show us." Professor Park, still half smiling, extended the green dry erase marker to her. Gloria approached the board, slowly but steadily. No one anticipated who would raise their hand. No one moved for a moment. It was as if something had fractured, not audibly but just enough to disrupt everything. 1 second the air in the room was thick with rivalry. The next it was stunned silence. Dr. Penfield stood before the board, arms crossed, eyes scrutinizing Gloria's work as if he feared to blink. A few professors leaned forward in their chairs. Others sat utterly motionless, attempting to process what they'd just witnessed. The green marker in Gloria's hand hung at her side. "Where did you acquire that knowledge?" Penfield finally inquired. Gloria shrugged, wiping her palms on her apron. "I used to study number theory years ago. Just kept reading, I suppose." He turned to look at her slowly. "Are you a mathematician?" "No," she stated simply. "I prepare chicken stew." That elicited a laugh, but not the kind she was accustomed to. This one was sharp, surprised, almost incredulous. Professor Glasgow chuckled nervously. Dr. Andrea Webb, who hadn't uttered a word that morning, murmured, This is unbelievable. Penfield didn't laugh. He returned to the board and tapped twice on a part of her equation. This section here. Where did you get the idea to apply irrational decay? Gloria took a breath. There's a paper from the mid-90s. Jorge Pimenta, University of Wisconsin. He attempted to apply something similar to divergence fields in fluid mechanics. It didn't pan out, but the structure resonated with me. Dr. Webb blinked. Pimenta? That paper was buried in peer-reviewed journals for years. I know, Gloria replied. I found it in a box someone discarded behind the library. Water damaged, but the math was still legible. Now even the skeptics were attentive. Dr. Penfield ran a hand over his face, then looked toward the department chair. This is excellent work. Truly excellent work. The chair, a gray-haired man with perpetually arched eyebrows, gave a tight nod but said nothing. You could almost sense the calculations occurring behind his eyes. How did this happen? Who is she? What does this mean for us? And yet, one voice in the room disrupted the rhythm again. Professor Park crossed her arms and declared, she's probably just reiterating something she memorized. This can't be original. Penfield didn't miss a beat. Then verify it. We have a board, a projector, and 20 academics in the room. Try to find flaws in it. For the next 15 minutes they tried. Oh, how they tried. 2 professors whispered in a corner, inputting numbers into laptops. One scribbled alternative routes across a second whiteboard. Another ran a symbolic logic chain attempting to prove a contradiction. But nothing broke. Every path they tested merely circled back to Gloria's framework. She leaned against the back wall, arms crossed now, simply observing. At one point, Professor Glasgow approached her. You're not truly just a lunch lady, are you? He asked, his voice softer than before. I truly am, she affirmed. But that's not all I am. The words lingered because that was the part they had overlooked. Not merely her intellect but her intricacy. They had dismissed her so effortlessly, so completely, that the very notion she could belong at their table felt inconceivable to them. Brilliance wore jackets and lanyards. It possessed credentials, titles, initials after its name. Gloria wore a stained apron and orthopedic sneakers. That alone had been sufficient to disqualify her in their eyes. Until now. Penfield tapped the board again. This step here. I want to run it through my software back home. But I'll say this much. It's a stronger direction than anything we've produced in 6 months. Gloria gave a tiny nod. That's kind of you. Kind? He retorted, smiling for the first time. It's accurate. She wasn't sure what to say after that. She wasn't accustomed to being the focal point of attention, and certainly not in a way that felt earned. Someone clapped. Then another. And then almost reluctantly a few more joined in. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was enough to send a ripple through the room. Something was shifting. But not everyone was clapping. Not Professor Park, who was already gathering her belongings, and not the department chair, who still hadn't uttered a word. But once she touched the chalk, everything transformed. Later, someone would remark it was like witnessing a piano player return to the keys after 30 years and still instinctively knowing where to place their hands. But in that moment, Gloria wasn't contemplating poetry. She was contemplating structure, movement, how numbers bent, how patterns materialized when you allowed them to behave organically instead of forcing them into neat equations. She was thinking in images and rhythm, not applause. She had approached the board with the marker as if she'd done it 1,000 times. And she had, not before an audience, not in a seminar room, but alone at her wobbly kitchen table, under a buzzing light night after night. After the applause subsided and people returned to their seats, Gloria began to elaborate on her reasoning in greater detail, not because she desired to prove anything, but because Penfield requested her to. I believe it works because you're approaching the entire set as rigid, she explained, tapping the board with the back of her knuckle. But if you treat it like a flexible loop, not a straight line, you can map the break as part of the system, not a flaw in it. Penfield nodded, completely engrossed. So you're integrating the decay variable as part of the solution instead of isolating it? That's why it closes cleanly. Exactly, Gloria affirmed. It's not a bug, it's the key. For a moment, the two of them were the only ones conversing. Not faculty and lunch lady, but simply 2 minds working through a problem. Dr. Andrew Webb observed them and leaned toward Glasgow. She's accomplishing what we couldn't. He didn't respond, merely chewed on the inside of his cheek. From across the room, a graduate student raised his hand. Sorry, could you repeat that part about the loop mapping? Gloria did slowly, clearly. And when he followed along nodding, you could see it register. He was learning something from her, something none of his professors had yet demonstrated. The board was a mess by the end, green and red ink layered with quick diagrams, arrows, scratch-outs and corrections. But Gloria's math held up. Each line connected to the next, no dead ends, no contradictions. For the first time in the room you could sense it, respect. Not the kind they politely offer, but the genuine kind, the kind that arises when someone compels you to perceive the world a little differently. Penfield stood to the side, hands on his hips, exhaling through his nose. I came here thinking I'd leave with more frustration, he said. But now I feel like I might actually get some sleep tonight. That elicited a few laughs, this time the good kind. He turned to Gloria again. Would you be open to showing this to my team at Stanford? She raised her eyebrows. Your team? Yeah, we've got 3 postdocs who've been stuck on this for months. If you don't mind, I'd like to share this exact sequence and credit you as a co-author if it makes it into our draft. Gloria blinked. I'm not qualified to co-author anything. Why not? Penfield inquired. I didn't finish college, she said. Didn't even get past my first semester. He paused. Doesn't matter. What you just did, that is the work. You don't need a degree to have insight. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded, not because she was convinced, but because she lacked the energy to argue. A few minutes later she excused herself and began collecting the coffee cups and paper plates. You don't have to do that, Penfield said, watching her. I know. But it's still my job. And just like that she was back to being invisible again, at least to those who wished to confine her to that role. But not everyone was willing to pretend they hadn't witnessed what occurred. Several graduate students remained behind, asking questions. One even followed her into the hall to obtain her email. As Gloria wheeled her cart out of the room, she overheard Professor Park mumbling something about lucky guesses and unreliable logic. She didn't turn around. She simply smiled to herself because she knew the math was sound. More than that, she knew she hadn't imagined it. She had reminded them and herself of who she truly was. But what astonished them more was her personal history. The scent of industrial soap and overcooked rice still clung to her apron as Gloria walked home that night, a little later than usual. She bypassed the bus. The 3-mile walk back to her apartment afforded her time to reflect. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket, her son probably. She let it ring. When she reached her building, she paused at the rusted mailbox marked Bexley. Her key habitually jammed. She jiggled it until it yielded, then ascended the narrow stairs that groaned under her steps. Inside her apartment, everything was quiet. The heater clicked on with a groan. A single bulb illuminated the kitchen, where a stack of dog-eared math journals rested beside a bowl of softening fruit. She slipped off her shoes, then reached for the faded folder wedged between a cookbook and an old stack of phone bills. Inside were documents she hadn't shown anyone in over 40 years. One was a letter dated April 1980 from the Office of Admissions at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dear Miss Bexley, we are pleased to inform you. She had wept when it arrived in the mail. Not tears of joy, but the kind where hope is too immense for your body to contain. She'd shown it to her mother, who lay on the living room couch with an oxygen tank and a cigarette in the same hand. You gonna go all the way to Boston, huh? Her mother had said between coughs. What about me? Her mother wasn't unkind, just fearful. She'd been ill for a long time and didn't trust doctors. Gloria had pledged to help her recover, but that meant staying. So she did. MIT called twice, then ceased. She worked at a local diner in Fresno while caring for her mother full-time. When her mother passed 2 years later, Gloria attempted to return to school, but life had already progressed without her. There were bills, then rent increases, then her son. Education became something that resided in the background. Not gone, just dormant. She continued to study independently, acquiring textbooks at thrift stores, sifting through library dumpsters, printing journal articles on the university library's dime when no one was looking. She never ceased learning, but she stopped believing anyone would ever care that she did. Until today. Gloria settled at the small table and opened her spiral-bound notebook, flipping past pages of problem sets she'd painstakingly recreated by hand. Some were messy, others resembled art. She traced her fingers over a page filled with modular arithmetic proofs, and then she did something she hadn't done in years. She smiled. Not politely, not for show, but the kind that surfaces when something long suppressed reemerges and breathes again. Later that night she called her son. He answered on the second ring. "Hey Ma, you good?" "I'm good, baby," she replied, then paused. "Remember how I used to help you with your math homework even in high school?" "Yeah," he chuckled. "You always made me write out the proofs, not just plug in the calculator." "Well," she said, "turns out that old habit might have impressed a few folks at work today." He sounded bewildered. "What happened?" "I solved something," she said. "Something real. They couldn't figure it out, but I did." "You mean like for the school?" She smiled. "Something like that." There was a silence on the line. Then, "You serious, Ma?" "I'm always serious about math." He laughed again, softer this time. "Man, that's wild." "Yeah," she agreed. "Wild." They conversed a little longer about nothing in particular, and when they hung up, Gloria leaned back in her chair, gazing at the old acceptance letter on the table before her. She had once thought that window had permanently closed. But perhaps it hadn't. Perhaps it had just cracked open again, just enough to let the air circulate. But life didn't erase her brilliance. It merely concealed it. By Monday morning, word had circulated across campus. The math department staff behaved as if nothing had occurred. They talked over each other in the break room, joked about sports scores, and returned to their usual coffee orders. But their eyes lingered longer when Gloria walked by. Some greeted her, some didn't. A few simply nodded awkwardly, unsure what to say or whether they even had the right to say anything at all. Gloria didn't mind. She wasn't there for commendation. She arrived at 5 a.m. as usual, donned her apron, checked the trays, and began preparing the day's pasta. She hummed softly as she worked, not because she was joyful, but because she appreciated the quiet before things became bustling. That afternoon, as she was mopping the faculty floor, Dr. Penfield reappeared. "Hey," he said gently, clearing his throat. She looked up, surprised. He was holding 2 coffees, one of which he handed to her. "I figured you wouldn't take a break unless someone made you," he said, grinning. She smirked and accepted it. "You figured right." They sat together on the bench just outside the dining hall. The wind was sharp and the oak trees dropped acorns as if targeting people's heads. "I sent your formulation to my team," Penfield stated. They were stunned. "I'm sure they'll enhance it," Gloria replied, sipping carefully. "No one's altering a thing. They're asking when they can speak with you." She shook her head. "I'm not trying to escalate this into anything. I didn't even intend to speak up the other day. I just couldn't help it." "That's precisely why it mattered," he asserted. "You weren't seeking attention, you simply perceived it." They sat for a few seconds in silence. Then Gloria asked, "Do you ever wonder how many people like me are out there?" "You mean people working in kitchens who can outthink tenured professors?" he asked with a smile. "Something like that." He looked thoughtful. "More than we care to admit." Inside, the kitchen buzzer sounded. She started to rise. "I know you're busy," he said, "but I meant what I said last week. You belong in that room." She didn't say anything at first. "I belong wherever I choose to be," she declared, standing up and finishing her coffee. As she walked back inside, 2 graduate students she didn't recognize were standing near the serving line, whispering. One held a printed copy of her board notes from the seminar. When they saw her, they quieted. One stepped forward awkwardly. "Miss Bexley, just Gloria. I read your notation set on the loop collapse theorem. I didn't grasp all of it, but it helped me rethink a problem I've been stuck on for weeks." She raised an eyebrow. "You here for lunch or tutoring?" The student laughed, embarrassed. "Honestly, both." She handed him a tray. "Well, eat first. Math's easier on a full stomach." They both smiled. It was subtle, but something shifted in that moment. Not grand, not dramatic, just human. By the end of the day, Gloria had received 2 emails on her work account. One from a student requesting assistance on a combinatorics project, and another from Dr. Webb inquiring if she'd be open to consulting on a senior thesis group struggling with number field classifications. None of this came with a title, no pay raise, no certificate. But it felt like progress. Still, not everyone was pleased. That evening, as Gloria stacked the last of the serving trays, she overheard Professor Park speaking with the department chair near the back fridge. I'm just saying, Park muttered. If we're bestowing co-authorships upon the cafeteria staff, what's next? Allowing janitors to draft policy memos. The chair didn't answer, not directly. He merely said, I've already received 3 calls from alumni. They heard the story. Don't underestimate what this signifies for the university. Park huffed. Optics shouldn't outweigh credentials. But Gloria didn't require their validation. She wasn't awaiting an apology. She'd learned long ago not to seek affirmation from individuals who couldn't see beyond uniforms and job titles. She didn't crave the spotlight. The whispers quieted, but they didn't vanish. A few days after the seminar, Gloria observed the shift, not in what people said to her but in what they chose not to say. Where there had once been laughter or casual dismissal, now there was a certain awkwardness, uneasy glances, the kind people exchange when they're uncertain whether to be embarrassed or offended. Professor Eun Park, for one, had made her position clear. She ceased eating in the dining hall altogether and avoided eye contact when their paths intersected. But that didn't prevent the passive-aggressive remarks from leaking out behind closed doors. She probably just memorized it, Park said once during a small departmental meeting, loud enough for the grad student taking minutes to wince. Anyone can regurgitate a paper someone else wrote. Another professor quietly asked, which paper was that again? Park didn't answer. Meanwhile, Gloria continued to show up. Same apron, same shift. She still scraped trays, refilled tea urns, and wiped down tables that professors left messy in their haste to return to their theories. But now she was also receiving emails, genuine ones. A doctoral candidate named Layla inquired if Gloria would review a rough draft of her dissertation. Another undergrad wanted to know if Gloria could elucidate a theorem in a way that truly made sense. She wasn't trying to be anyone's mentor. She wasn't trying to build a second career. But suddenly, people who used to walk past her without a glance were now stopping her between shifts, asking questions, scribbling down her notes on napkins, just as she used to do with theirs. Still, resentment lingered in certain corners. Dr. Harold Yates, a senior professor with tenure and a commanding voice, made a point during a faculty luncheon. I believe we should be cautious about how we characterize this situation, he stated, adjusting his tie. It's commendable, certainly, but it doesn't alter the fact that we are a research institution. We rely on rigor, on proven processes. Someone asked if that meant her solution wasn't valid. Yates paused. I'm just saying, we don't confer credibility for a clever moment. Gloria wasn't in the room when he said it, but she learned of it within the hour. She didn't flinch. She didn't storm into his office. She simply made a quiet note in her pocket notebook. Rigor doesn't mean rejection of new voices. It means testing without ego. Penfield, on the other hand, was done being deferential. The next day he scheduled a second presentation. This time he insisted that Gloria co-present. She should be in the room when we dissect this, he informed the department chair. She's the one who perceived what we couldn't. The chair let out a long sigh. Do you comprehend how intricate this is? No, Penfield stated plainly. I comprehend how simple it should be. That Friday, room 214 filled again. This time with more students, a few visiting faculty, and even a journalist from the local paper. Gloria didn't desire the attention, she almost didn't go. But something inside her whispered, you earned this seat. You don't need permission to occupy it. She stood beside Penfield as he explained the refined version of the problem and the framework that led to the proposed solution. Gloria didn't say much, just enough to clarify where needed. When a student asked how she conceived of it, she replied, I didn't. I just stopped assuming it had to behave the way everyone else dictated. That answer resonated more profoundly than she expected. After the presentation, Penfield turned to her and said, they'll catch on. Some slower than others. She gave a small smile. Let 'em take their time. I've got plenty. Back in the kitchen, her co-workers remained the same. Marisol, who handled desserts, teased her for being famous. The letter arrived in a manila envelope, discreetly tucked into her locker between her apron and a box of lemon tea bags she kept for long shifts. No logo, no fanfare, just her name typed neatly on the front, Gloria Bexley. She opened it slowly, expecting perhaps another scheduling notice or campus policy update. Instead, it was a formal invitation from Stanford. Dr. Curtis Penfield and the Stanford Department of Mathematics formally invite Gloria Bexley to serve as an honorary research contributor on the RSET Anomaly project. Should she accept, her name will appear as co-author on all forthcoming publications related to the solution framework she developed. A stipend and travel accommodations will be provided. She read it 3 times, then folded it up and tucked it into her coat pocket before anyone could see. Later that day, Penfield found her behind the counter, stirring a pot of lentils. "So," he asked, eyes twinkling, "you get the letter?" "I got it," she said without looking up. "Had to read it with the stove fan off to make sure I wasn't hallucinating." He laughed. "What do you think?" She took a breath. "I think it's flattering, that's all. I also think I'm 62 and I have a lease, a job I can't simply abandon, and knees that don't appreciate stairs." "Fair enough," he conceded. "But this doesn't have to mean you transform your life. We'd accommodate your schedule, remote sessions, Zoom calls, whatever's easiest. It's not about pulling you into academia. It's about honoring your contribution." She looked at him, then truly looked. "No one's ever offered to honor what I've done," she said. "Not once." "Well, that changes now," he replied, "because the work speaks for itself. And frankly, we could use your insight." She turned the burner down and leaned on the counter, arms crossed. "And what does the university think about this?" she asked, "because I've heard the whispers." Penfield nodded slowly. "They'll adjust. Some are dragging their feet, but they'll come around, especially now that the article's been picked up." "What article?" He reached into his bag and pulled out a print copy of the San Jose Times. There, in the education section, was the headline, "From Cafeteria to Classroom, the woman who solved Stanford's math puzzle." Her photo was blurry, taken from behind as she wrote on the whiteboard. She looked older, smaller than she'd imagined, but there she was, name in print. "They interviewed me," Penfield said. "Told them I wasn't the star of the story." She shook her head. "What am I supposed to do with all this attention?" "Whatever you desire. You can ignore it, leverage it, embrace it, or walk away from it. But don't pretend like you didn't earn it." That night, Gloria sat at her kitchen table again, this time without the math books. Just the letter, just the paper, just her. She pondered all the years that had elapsed between the acceptance letter from MIT and this one. All the things she'd relinquished, all the things she'd done to persevere. The world had never given her anything. Every step forward she'd made, she'd forged herself. And now it was offering her a choice. The next morning, she walked directly to the campus office and requested to speak to HR. The young woman behind the desk looked startled. "Sure. Did you wish to schedule an appointment?" "No," Gloria said. "I just need to update my file. I'll be part-time starting next month. I've got another position." "Oh, at a different department?" "Something like that." Gloria didn't cease working at the dining hall completely. She refused to abandon the rhythm of normalcy. But she reduced her hours to 3 days a week. The other 2 she spent in virtual meetings with researchers, reviewing new papers, assisting a doctoral student from Texas in developing a proof sequence she'd been stuck on. Gloria's new schedule suited her. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays she was still in the kitchen at dawn, tying on her apron, wheeling out the prep carts, and checking the soup pots. She still knew which professors left half their tea untouched and which students secretly took extra biscuits when they thought no one was watching. Tuesdays and Thursdays were different. Those mornings she wore jeans, a cardigan, and sneakers that weren't stained with broth. She sat at her kitchen table with her second-hand laptop open, a mug of cinnamon coffee by her elbow, and Zoom links awaiting in her inbox. One call was always with Arden, a freshman in the engineering program who had overheard her during the seminar and had since begun shadowing her. Tall, lanky, and awkward in the way most intelligent kids are when surrounded by people who speak rapidly and listen slowly. The first time he emailed her, he kept it brief. "I don't know how to see numbers the way you do. Can you help?" Gloria agreed, not because she needed another project but because something about the way he asked reminded her of her younger self, eager but never quite certain if the door was meant for someone like her. They started small, arithmetic tricks, pattern recognition, then progressed to sequences, abstract groups, modular problems. Arden lit up when something clicked, and Gloria never tired of witnessing that moment. "You're not teaching me like they do," he said once. "How's that?" she asked. "You don't make me feel like I'm behind." She smiled. "That's because you're not. You're just not moving their way. On campus, some things hadn't changed. People still rushed past her in the halls. Some still assumed she was there to refill the condiments. But a few now paused, greeted her, even inquired what she was working on. Penfield visited once more before flying back to California. He brought her a signed copy of the pre-publication paper they co-authored. Her name was right there, printed in black ink, Gloria Bexley. She held it in both hands and said, "Never thought I'd see that." "Neither did I," he replied. "That's on me." The university had requested to feature her in their newsletter. She declined. She didn't want her face beside a headline that reduced her to lunch lady genius or hidden mind. They missed the point, she asserted. It wasn't about being hidden, it was about people not looking. Instead, she asked for something else. A small math study table in the back of the dining hall. Nothing elaborate, just 2 chairs, a dry erase board and a stack of problem books. The university agreed. And every Thursday afternoon after the lunch rush she sat there, not as a professor, not even as a tutor, but simply as someone willing to work through a problem with anyone who was stuck and courageous enough to admit it. One day Arden arrived with 3 other freshmen. None of them looked her in the eye at first, but by the end of the hour, they were debating primes and laughing like old friends. "That's how it begins," Gloria told them. "You laugh at something once and then you don't forget it." They nodded, scribbling notes. When the new semester began, a flyer went up on the bulletin board. Office hours with Gloria B. Thursdays 1:30 p.m. Come hungry for lunch and answers. She didn't write it. Arden did. By now, even Professor Park had ceased pretending not to see her. One afternoon, passing in the hall, she offered a quiet, forced, "Good afternoon." Gloria returned it genuinely. No need to keep score. She had already achieved something far greater than any debate. Respect without a title, purpose without a pedestal, an influence that didn't stem from status, but from being present, listening, and sharing what she knew when someone needed it. She never sought out that seminar room moment, but now people sought her out, not to gawk but to learn. But her most significant contribution wasn't just mathematics. It was what transpired next. Sometimes the most brilliant individual in the room isn't at the head of the table. They're pouring coffee, observing quietly from the corner, perceiving everything others overlook. Gloria Bexley never required a spotlight to be brilliant. She didn't pursue titles or academic distinctions. She didn't concern herself with academic politics, or which faculty member held tenure, or whose name was trending in the department newsletter. She cared about truth, about numbers, about comprehending the world. One line, one variable, one pattern at a time. And that was enough. The narrative of what happened at Pinehurst University became a point of discussion across a few college campuses for a while. Some people used it to speak about untapped talent. Others tried to portray it as a heartwarming anecdote for diversity brochures. Gloria disregarded all of it. She wasn't striving to be anyone's symbol. She simply desired for people to cease assuming that brilliance always came in the same guise, because it doesn't. Sometimes it appears as a woman with silver-streaked hair pushing a mop bucket through the hallway at sunrise. Sometimes it sounds like a soft voice asking the one question no one else considered. Sometimes it's the person you pass every day without uttering a word. That was the profound lesson. Not merely that Gloria had solved a problem the experts couldn't, but that no one believed she could. Not because she wasn't capable, but because they weren't observing. They didn't see the notes scribbled in the margins of her pocket-sized notebook, or the borrowed textbooks she studied by the light of a flickering bulb. They didn't hear the way she whispered formulas to herself while folding napkins, or notice how she lingered near the back of lecture rooms just to listen. They saw an apron and made assumptions. But Gloria knew better. She had spent her life achieving difficult things without commendation. What distinguished her wasn't raw talent. It was persistence. Quiet, steadfast, everyday persistence. She read what others discarded. She remembered what others forgot. She continued learning when no one was watching. And now she was teaching more than just mathematics. She was teaching people how to truly listen again, how to make space at the table for someone who wasn't expected to be there. She reminded them that genius doesn't request permission. It simply continues to appear, day after day, shift after shift, until one moment disrupts the pattern. That was her true gift. Arden once asked her, "Do you wish things had unfolded differently? If you had accepted that scholarship? If your mother hadn't fallen ill?" Gloria considered for a long time before replying. No, she said. I don't wish things were different. I just wish people had looked sooner. He nodded but didn't respond. There wasn't much to say. He understood. Gloria still worked her shifts, still served soup, still wiped trays and tied her apron the same way she always had. But now when someone posed a question they listened to the answer. Now when she spoke in a room no one laughed. Well, some still did, but it was the right kind of laugh this time. One of recognition, one that implied, I see you. And that was more than sufficient. Because in the end it wasn't about solving equations. It was about being seen. Brilliance doesn't require permission. It merely needs a moment.